I got the notification and it says we're live, but I don't think it was showing up on Facebook. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. Excellent. Sorry about that. I had an error message from Zoom that said we weren't live. And, you know, when you get contradicting messages, you just got to figure some stuff out. So happy Monday, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to another Parents Helping Parents Live. I think tonight's going to be a doozy. If you're not familiar with Parents Helping Parents, maybe you're catching this video on a friend's news feed or seeing it shared on YouTube or something like that. We're really glad you're here. Parents Helping Parents is a Oklahoma City-based nonprofit organization founded by parents, primarily run by parents, with the message of providing education, resources, and shared experiences to parents who have a child any age who might be struggling with a substance use disorder. We have parents in our organization that have been around for a long time, and some parents that are just coming in who have young people who are 13, 14, 15, just kind of beginning those first stages of experimentation with drugs and alcohol. We serve parents who have had young people who are now well into adulthood, 30s and 40s, who are either active struggling with addiction or have found recovery or have come in and out of recovery. So we're a really mixed bag of people who really just want to share our story and help other families. So if you find yourself in that boat, you're in the right spot tonight, and we're really happy that you're here. For more information kind of about who we are and what we do, for all of the partnerships and the different support group meetings that we host online and throughout the state of Oklahoma, you can follow us on Facebook at Parents Helping Parents Inc., or you can check us out on the web, parentshelpingparents.info. It's where you can find out all the wonderful information, including the information about our upcoming fundraiser in the spring, which I think is going to be a really wonderful night here in Oklahoma City at the Will Rogers Theater. So with that being said, I don't think I've got much else. Well, actually, I do have much else. I always try to rush the game here. I'm going to remind everybody right now, and then I'll remind you again at the end. Go ahead and reach over and click the share button if you're watching live on Facebook. What that's going to do is that's automatically going to share our video to your newsfeed. Exponentially increases the amount of people that we can reach week in and week out with these messages. Quite literally, even if you only have a couple hundred friends on Facebook, one of those people is going to have a friend or a family member who's struggling with addiction, who's struggling with mental health, and who needs services. Hearing a message like we have tonight quite literally could change a life. So reach over, click the share button. I encourage you to like and share along the way as well. So this is an interactive kind of live stream. We're taking questions, we're taking comments as we go along. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. If you're watching live on Facebook and you want to comment in the comment section of the video, that's great. I'm monitoring that over here on the second screen, and I can check that out and answer questions in the chat, offer feedback, or bring those questions into the live stream as well. Please remember that any comments that you put on Facebook, that's the internet. They're not anonymous. Your name is attached to them. They will permanently be on there for all to see until the end of time. So if you're concerned about that, if you want to protect your privacy or protect your anonymity, we actually have an anonymous way to submit questions. In the title of this video on Facebook, there is a Google text number. I'm monitoring that right here on my computer. Those questions come to me without your name attached. We will ask them, we will delete them at the end of the show, and they will disappear. So that's a way that you can engage with us if you're concerned about protecting some of your privacy, or maybe you're just not quite ready to ask public questions yet about your son or daughter's substance use disorders, and we want to honor that as well. So here's your second reminder. Reach over, click the share button, click the like button, help us reach as many people as possible tonight. So with that being said, I am going to bring in kind of our panel of speakers tonight. They have a plethora of experience, and they've got a lot of great information to share with us this evening. So I'm going to allow them to kind of introduce themselves. They're going to go straight into their presentation. And then please, if you've got questions or comments, be sure you toss those in, because we're all going to be having a nice discussion at the end of their presentation here in a few minutes. So Kevin, Virginia, whoever would like to go first, by all means, the stage is yours.
Why don't you go first, Virginia, and then I'll hand it over to Laura.
Okay. Well, my name is Virginia Holleman, and first of all, Derek, I want to thank you very much for having me and Lauren and Kevin on tonight to discuss a cause that is very near and dear to my heart. It was 4 years ago today, actually, that my husband and I took my 17-year-old son to a residential treatment facility out of state. after he'd been spiraling out of control using drugs and alcohol, and we were desperate and at our wits' end. But before we took my son to treatment, I had done my research and looked at I had health insurance, looked at my health insurance booklet, and discovered that yes, treatment for drug and alcohol addiction was covered under my policy, and I had the treatment facility had called ahead of time and had confirmed coverage, and all was well until 2 days after we dropped my son off at the facility. I got a call from the director of the facility saying that the insurance company was denying coverage completely for the treatment. And I was devastated. I was in shock. I did not understand, because my treatment booklet said it was covered. And so that was the beginning of my journey. I dug in, I educated myself on what I learned was the federal parody law, and which Laura's going to talk here a little bit more about, and we'll talk more about it when Laura's done with her presentation. But I educated myself, and I was able to ultimately get a lot of my son's treatment paid, but it was a lot of work. I spent a lot of time researching, learned that consumers aren't familiar with this law, and I vowed to do what I could to help other families in the future facing what I faced. So that's just a little snippet of why I'm here tonight. So thank you again for having me.
Great, thanks, Virginia. Just a very brief introduction from me. My name is Kevin Costello, and I'm a lawyer and a law school clinician. It's called a law school clinic is the part of the law school where students engage in real world practice of law, and that's learn all of the skills necessary to become practicing lawyers by doing that. So it's sort of akin to residence in a teaching hospital. This is the part of the law school that I work in. So the name of my employer is the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation at Harvard Law School. And our mission statement is to improve access to healthcare for people struggling with chronic illness of all different kinds, including an emphasis that we have on access to mental health services. So I'm going to turn it over now to one of my star law students to introduce herself and to present to you all this evening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Park, and I am a student here at Harvard Law School. I first want to say thank you to Derek for having us, and of course, Virginia for connecting us to Parents Helping Parents, and Kevin for his guidance on this project. As a student here, as Kevin mentioned, I am working here at the Health Law and Policy Clinic on a project called the Mental Health Parity Project. And if I can share my screen, I will talk today about mental health parity and, as Virginia mentioned earlier, the federal parity law. So if I could just get that working. Is everyone able to see the PowerPoint? Fantastic. Okay, so the presentation is titled Health Insurance and the Federal Parity Act, What You Need to Know. And as I mentioned, my name is Laura Park, and I'm a student at Harvard Law. The reason why we're talking about mental health parity today is because generally the federal government, the US federal government, does regulate health coverage through various federal laws, as I'm sure many of you are aware. In addition, various states have different laws that regulate health coverage, and I do know Oklahoma currently has its own mental health parity law, but I will be focusing today on federal regulation. So these various federal laws that apply across the country, the important thing to know about them is none of these laws actually regulate the content of insurance policies. So what this means is none of these laws actually address what needs to be covered in insurance plans. No one is going to insurance plans and telling them you must cover certain things. Instead, they are just covering the procedures. That means that people like us who care about concerns about mental health and substance use disorder coverage, the only way that we have of actually addressing these concerns right now is through the concept of mental health parity. And so what is mental health parity? It stands for the premise that insurance coverage for mental health and substance use disorders should be equal to coverage for medical and surgical conditions. So I will explain further later how that really plays out. But why is it even important and why do we care? This is because generations and years of stigma and discrimination against those with mental illness, both inside and outside of the healthcare system, have contributed to various inequitable insurance coverage policies and practices. And those policies and practices over time have then in turn just led to more stigma and discrimination. So it's really a vicious cycle that is more important than ever to break through. And so the way that the federal government has been addressing this discrimination for mental health and substance use disorders is through the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, or what we will now call the Federal Parity Act. Congress enacted it in 2008, and what it does, as I mentioned earlier, it does not mandate insurance coverage of these conditions, but it says if they are covered, so if an insurance plan does provide coverage for mental health and substance use disorders, such coverage must be in parity with medical and surgical benefits. So that means that any coverage requirements or limitations or restrictions to accessing coverage cannot be more restrictive than it would be to access medical or surgical benefits of the same classification. The access to treatment coverage must be the same. And so I mentioned Federal Parity Act classifications in the previous slide. And so to go further into explaining what that means, the list of classifications is on the left of the screen. There are 6 different ones. And what this means is that if you have some sort of mental health condition that requires some sort of inpatient and in-network treatment, it will be evaluated against inpatient or in-network treatment of a similar kind within that classification. So I've illustrated that using these little blue and red icons. The blue will stand for mental health conditions, the red will stand for medical surgical conditions. And what this is meant to show is that we will be comparing inpatient and in-network to another inpatient and in-network treatment, not across classifications, but within the same one. So the Federal Parity Act that was enacted in 2008 has various provisions, and they consider various types of things when they are really evaluating what these plans are providing for. So the first one are financial requirements. They are exactly what they sound like. They are things like co-payments, co-insurance, deductibles, basically anything with a dollar sign and that involves your wallet. What this means, for example, is that your deductible cannot be higher for a mental health or substance use disorder condition than it would be for a medical or surgical condition that is similar within the same classification. This also applies to things like out-of-pocket limits or annual or lifetime dollar limits. The second provision that the Federal Parity Act has are called quantitative treatment limitations. So this basically means any sort of treatment restriction or limitation that does have a number attached to it. So not a dollar sign necessarily, but some sort of numerical value. These may be things like annual or lifetime visit limits or caps on the number of covered treatments. A plan cannot give you a lower cap on the number of treatments that you can have across a year for for mental health and substance use disorder conditions than they would for medical or surgical conditions of the same classification. So those are 2 of the Federal Parity Act provisions. Today we'll be focusing mainly on the third, which is called a non-quantitative treatment limitation, or an NQTL. It's quite a mouthful, so from now on, when I say treatment limitation or restriction, I will be referring to this specific provision. And it's a little bit hard to understand because this can be quite slippery. These are restrictions that don't necessarily have a value attached, that don't necessarily have a number. So they are things like pre-authorization requirements or network adequacy, or perhaps restrictions on telemedicine or telephone visit restrictions, or perhaps the exclusion of applied behavioral analysis for autism spectrum disorder. The reason why these can be a little bit difficult to compare is they can often feel like you're comparing apples to oranges. How do you really say that something like a schizophrenic episode that required hospitalization is truly the same as a broken leg? So this can be very difficult, and this is often where the insurance companies sort of slip through the cracks when it comes to parity. To explain these treatment limitations a little bit further, I want to provide you with an example. This particular example comes from a real case that has been litigated. It involved a patient on the left, depicted in blue, that was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. And she was denied coverage for nutritional counseling, where her plan did provide coverage for nutritional counseling for those diagnosed with diabetes. This is a clear example of making it more difficult to access coverage for a mental health or substance use disorder condition than it is for a medical surgical condition of the same classification. And this is an example of a treatment limitation that is not in parity. Another example that goes to the story that Virginia was mentioning about her son is another, it regards residential treatment, often for substance use disorders. This is another common thing that has been litigated. Oftentimes, there may be a patient requiring inpatient treatment at some sort of residential mental health facility, or perhaps a wilderness program. And that has often been denied coverage in ways that did not apply to patients requiring inpatient treatment at a skilled nursing facility for a medical or surgical condition. Again, same classification, requiring inpatient treatment care and just making it harder to access for those with mental health or substance use disorders. So the reason we're focusing on these NQTLs, these very specific treatment limitations, is that over time, since the Federal Parity Act came out in 2008, the government found that enforcement simply wasn't really cutting it. Up until then, they were just providing compliance assistance, providing guidance, but it wasn't enough, and several plans remained out of parity. And so in 2021, Congress provided the government with a new enforcement tool. This enforcement tool is called comparative analysis. And what this means is that as of 2021, specifically February 2021, the government was allowed to ask plans to provide a very specific comparative analysis, so some sort of explanation as to how they were in parity by February 2021 upon request. And so that's exactly what the government did. After this new enforcement tool law went into effect, they asked over 100 plans for the comparative analyses of their coverage limitations. These letters asked for over 1,000 different treatment limitations. They wanted an explanation of how they were in parity. And the report from the 3 federal agencies that are responsible for enforcing this Federal Parity Act came out in the beginning of 2022, and the results were truly shocking. After their requests, the agencies did not receive a single comparative response that was sufficient. Out of the 100 letters they sent and over 1,000 requests for these specific coverage limitation analyses, they did not get a single one that properly described how they were in parity. In fact, many of these plans, even though they were required by law to be prepared by February 2021, many of them requested for more time or simply did not have them ready, or they were very conclusive saying, we are in parity, but not properly explaining their standards and their procedures. And so I've been talking about these comparative analyses, and just to explain a little bit further about what they really are, it just is a lot of detailed information that demonstrates that the processes, strategies, evidentiary standards, and other factors used to apply limitations to mental health and substance use disorder benefits are comparable to and applied no more stringently than to medical and surgical benefits. So like I've been saying up until now, it requires plans to clearly list out and explain in a very detailed manner how it is not more difficult to access coverage for mental health or substance use disorders. So why are we even talking about these comparative analyses? And why is this important today? It's because mental health issues in adults and children are getting worse every day and has especially gotten worse during and after the coronavirus pandemic. Just to put some statistics on that, the average percentage of adults reporting symptoms of anxiety or depression has increased from 11 to 41% just between 2019 to 2021. And for young adults aged 18 through 24, that number is even higher at 56%. And what is important to this particular group of parents is that 47% of parents say that the pandemic had a negative impact on their child's mental health. And 70 to 80% of parents worry about things like self-harm, eating disorders, depression, alcohol, or drugs that may negatively impact teenage children. So this is an issue that we really need to pay attention to now more than ever. Communities of color are also more likely to report symptoms than other communities and have historically faced challenges accessing mental health care, as well as the LGBT community. 51% of whom say in the past year, they thought they needed mental health services, but did not get them. I also should mention that in the last 2 decades, deaths due to drug overdose are 4 times higher than they ever have been, which has largely been driven by the opioid crisis. So as we've been talking, the government has certainly been trying, but has clearly not been able to achieve meaningful enforcement on its own. And the reason why we all have a part to play in this is because we all care about mental health parity, ensuring that the loved ones around us have access to proper coverage. So what can we do? Well, there are various parties who are able to request a comparative analysis. As I mentioned earlier, the government is able to, and they have been and have not been able to get sufficient responses, but hopefully we'll see improvement in the future. Similar to Virginia's story, a plan member who has been denied coverage does have the option to go through the internal appeals process, but also they can request a comparative analysis separate from that process, asking why they've been denied and explanations to show that the reasons they've been denied are equal to what would apply to a medical or surgical condition. I would like to focus especially on the other 2 parties, these blue squares, because this is where a lot of us will also come in. Plan members who have not yet been denied coverage, but simply care about mental health parity and want to know more about what their plan provides, can also request a comparative analysis, as well as their authorized representatives. So I apologize, the lights in this room turn off if I don't move enough, but I would say that most of us probably fall into one of these buckets because if anyone is under any of these listed plans, which covers millions of people in this country, you can request a comparative analysis directly from your health insurance plan. And the way that the center that Kevin and I work in are coming into this is that we're really encouraging that people who are able to try to directly request comparative analyses from their insurers. Our hope is that while the government is working to ensure compliance with the federal parity law, perhaps also the more people that ask their insurers about these comparative analyses that show that we care about mental health parity, the more they will wake up and actually be compliant and provide these explanations and hopefully increase access to mental health and substance use disorder treatment coverage over time. And so our center is compiling records of your requests for comparative analyses at the SurveyMonkey on the slide. We'd love to know who is asking, if people are asking, if they've heard anything back, and if people are able to get comparative analyses in response, we'd love to see what they look like, because as far as we know, even the agencies, the federal agencies, have never seen a sufficiently detailed comparative analysis. So this is really in the early stages for them, and we're trying to learn more information. And so the center also has template letters available at the link on the bottom that apply to any of the categories in the previous slide, where you can just put your information in and send it directly to your insurer and hopefully hear back within 30 days. And so I just want to end with a reminder that mental health parity was always important, but has become more important than ever. And as we wait to hear from the federal agencies, as we await their next report, which should be coming out in January, as we await the responses to that, we all have a part to play. And I know everyone on this live stream today understands how important it is that there is proper treatment coverage for mental health and substance use disorders. And we really hope that this will start to move that further.
Thank you so much, Laura. Let me bring us back to a gallery view for everybody. This is obviously an incredibly complex issue. How is this affecting families, like on a day in and day out basis?
I can try to speak to that the best I can, and please, Kevin, feel free to jump in at any time. I think this applies especially to the families of those who have loved ones with any sort of mental health or substance use disorder, because as even Virginia mentioned, her plan booklet simply had a line that said, "We cover this." And it's natural to just think, of course, this will be covered. And what's most important when there is someone who's in need of care is getting that person that care. Oftentimes the concern of, will my insurance coverage cover this? Will there be issues? That's often, back of mind. Most important is getting people the care. And so in the condition of someone arriving at a residential treatment center and then later being told there are all of these hoops that you have to jump through to get this covered. And oftentimes those hoops are technically not in parity, not in accordance with federal law. This especially affects those families.
Yeah, nothing more to add other than to say that the importance of healthcare consumers supplementing the government's effort to enforce this law. I mean, for Congress to have given consumers this tool to ask for these comparative analyses is a very clear sign that although it's a long-term method, and although it can be incredibly frustrating to sort of stand by during a period where a denial has happened and you're appealing it, this really is a kind of brick by brick approach to say, absent these kinds of enforcement mechanisms, insurers are going to feel much freer to engage in self-interested behavior to deny coverage. And so this enforcement mechanism, I think, kind of creates an undercurrent to let insurers know that they are going to be held accountable for this federal law, which, as Laura said, has been on the books since 2008 and ranks pretty highly on the list of most under-enforced federal laws. So it's difficult, but I think it's an important endeavor to keep going with.
Yeah, and I might add, I mean, it's something that we can do because sometimes we feel so helpless. And I just want to mention, you talk about how families are affected, this law has primarily relied on consumers for enforcement. As Laura said, there's really no enforcement mechanism with this law. And so it falls on the consumers, but most consumers aren't even aware of this federal parity law. They're not aware of their rights. And if they are by chance aware of the rights, most families are in crisis. They've been dealing for months, weeks, years with their loved one who is struggling with substance use or mental health challenges. And we're in crisis. I was in crisis at the time. And so families, even if they are aware of their rights, they're so worn down and emotionally drained that it's hard for them to raise these issues. And unfortunately, the insurance companies know all of this and they take advantage of this. And so families are really affected. And, what I tell people, if they're facing any adverse decision from an insurance company, number one, don't accept what the insurance company says. Don't accept that. educate yourself, learn about the parity law, learn about your rights, learn about what you can do, and then advocate for yourself and fight back. And I know that's really hard to do when your loved one, when you're in crisis, when you've been in crisis, when your loved one's in treatment or just getting out of treatment or wherever they are in the process. It is really hard to do because I was there, and I'm also an attorney. In fact, I'm an insurance attorney. But at the time this is going on, I didn't know any of this either. And so it was really hard for me. And I thought, if it's really hard for me, how hard is this for the average consumer who doesn't have a law degree and isn't familiar with insurance law? So it's just a real struggle for families when they're facing these issues.
Yeah, Virginia, I think that brings up a really good point, is this seems like such an overwhelming task to have to go through when you don't have the experience and you don't have the legal verbiage to do kind of combat with the insurance companies. And so for families who don't have like immediate access to a resource like that, what's a first step in getting their loved one care when there seems to be an insurance barrier in place?
Well, after you don't accept what the insurance company says, educate yourself. And there's a lot of resources online, which is where I turn to for help and what you can do. The Kennedy Forum is an amazing resource. They have a website, lots of different websites, but you can start with the kennedyforum.org or don'tdenyme.org. And they have lots of toolkits that will take you step by step what you should do. Another great resource is the Partnership to End Addiction. They have, they don't focus solely on insurance matters. They focus on all addiction matters, but they do have a lot of resources on what to do step by step if your insurance company denies you or there's some adverse decision. So that's what I would do, is educate yourself by accessing these resources. And that's like don'tdenyme.org, the kennedyforum.org, and drugfree.org. That's the Partnership to End Addiction's website. You'll find a wealth of information there that will help you. And don't give up. Don't give up. Advocate for yourself, for your loved one. Call the insurance company. Deal with the providers. I was going back and forth between the provider and the insurance company. There's appeals. There's a lot. There's so much that we can't get into all of it in this 1 hour or 45-minute meeting, but if I could just direct you to those resources. And I was so thrilled to hear about this comparative analysis that we can all request. And I'm going to do it, and I would encourage each and every one of you to I don't know if you can click on the link or if you wrote that down, or if we could maybe put those links in the comments. Derek, would that be possible?
If somebody will either put them in the chat right now or shoot them over to my email, I'll add them into the comments of the Facebook page for sure.
Okay.
And Virginia, if you want to put in the links to the resources that you mentioned also, I would be happy to add those to the comments.
Okay, yeah, I will do that. So this is just another way, in addition to fighting on your own, to request these comparative analysis that Laura talked about. That's not going to bring anyone immediate relief, but as Kevin said, brick by brick, we've got to create more accountability on the part of insurers. And until the laws change, until we have stronger national laws or stronger state laws or stronger case law, this is just something that we can do to help out the cause.
Yeah. Any other feedback, Kevin, from you or Laura, about like what first steps families should take if they were struggling to get coverage for a loved one?
No, just to echo, we work a lot with the Kennedy Forum as well. So one thing I might ask Virginia to just mention is the timing issue, right? The notion of being in an acute crisis and having to worry about coverage on the front end, because that obviously impacts the selection of provider. And so it might be helpful to hear Virginia's experience with respect to the timing of finding the provider and worrying about the coverage associated with the provider at the same time when you're in the middle of an acute crisis.
Yeah, like finding a network provider, is that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and finding network providers is hard. You know, if you have your private insurance, you know what your in-network is, you know what your out-of-network providers are, and obviously you're going to get the best coverage, the most paid for with a network provider, and that can be difficult to find, especially for adolescents. My son was 17 years old, and it's very difficult to find quality adolescent treatment, at least here in this part of the country. So it is important that you find the right facility, the right provider, and make sure there's coverage. Is that what you meant by timing, Kevin? Another thing about timing, it doesn't speak to that, but especially if you're doing a retrospective appeal, if you're doing an appeal like, after your child has been treated or your loved one's been treated, there are, concrete deadlines that must be met to appeal decisions. And so it's really important that you review all the letters from the insurance company, instead of perhaps put them in a drawer like you do bills because it's so stressful you don't want to look at them. Read those letters, look at the timelines, look at your explanation of benefits letters. Usually you have 180 days to make an appeal. You need to pay attention to those deadlines as well.
Yeah. This might be a question that's slightly off topic, but it's something that I've had, that I've experienced even in my own private practice working with clients here. How is it that an insurance company can pre-authorize services and then come back and actually deny claims on the back end? For somebody that's not in the game, that seems really disconnected and predatory to me.
Yeah, so I mean, that it's a really interesting question, and it will get into a whole slew of different methodologies that insurers will use that would fall under the umbrella, if you recall Laura's categorization of what are called NQTLs, non-quantitative treatment limits, right? So that might be because the difference between pre-authorizing a certain kind of coverage and then coming along afterward and saying, oh, you didn't dot this I or cross this T, and so the claim is denied. To the extent that they're doing that in a self-interested way that is more stringent than they are doing on the other side of the ledger for medical and surgical benefits, to the extent that that is true, that would be an example of a parity violation. And that is something that you could use as a lever in the overall process. So obviously, insurers have lots of methods to limit their exposure, and that sounds like it's one of them, Derek.
Yeah, yeah.
For example, if you for me to go on with that,
Yeah,
Derek,
go ahead.
I mean, like in my situation, that's exactly what happened. The treatment facility, they got authorization ahead of time before we even went down to the treatment facility and said, yeah, you're covered. All you need to do is pay your deductible and you're good. And then 2 days later, they are denying coverage. Well, they said, all health plans require the treatment to be medically necessary, and that medical necessity is really where those insurance companies get you with the NQTLs, the non-quantitative treatment limitations. It's really a mouthful. And so with my situation, they said that it was not medically necessary for my son to have treatment because he was not homicidal or suicidal. And of course, my plan said nothing about that. And they said in order for his treatment to be medically necessary, he had to be either homicidal or suicidal. Well, that wasn't the case, actually. But what the insurance companies do is they have either their own standards that are so narrow and restrictive that almost nothing is covered, or they say they follow, or they say they are following standards, but they're really not. And in my case, my health plan was required to follow the ASAM criteria. But when I ultimately purchased my own digital copy of ASAM and looked at the requirements or the level of care that my son should have been at his age and with what was going on, he met almost every single one of the requirements. And so I found out it was not true that you had to be homicidal or suicidal in order for the treatment to be medically necessary. But insurance companies, it's a lot easier for them to to just say what they want to say, because it's not easily measurable. It's not, quantitative, and it's really hard to disguise to both the consumers and to the government. So that's what happens is, you get the person into treatment, and then they, come up with all these reasons why it's not medically necessary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. As an addiction treatment and mental health provider, even that language crawls all over me, because I can remember having conversations with insurance providers, especially when I was working in residential treatment for adolescents. And at this point, it was like that high school females that I was working in a treatment center for, who would say, "Oh, this isn't medically necessary treatment." And I would tell them, like, okay, well, I'm going to put this 15-year-old victim of sexual abuse who's using methamphetamines every day before she comes into treatment, and you can tell her and her family that this isn't medically necessary for her well-being.
Just to add another sort of layer of I don't know, dystopia on top of that. I mean, what's happening in many instances is the insurance company is running a kind of algorithm against the file or the claim that gets submitted, right? And so they're using all these categorical rules, right, that import, are these checkboxes checked kind of thing. And they're running that against a highly individualized set of circumstances where the provider has already, by definition, determined it to be medically necessary because they're providing the care, right? The providers aren't generally in the business of providing non-medically necessary care. And so you see this conflict between a provider doing a customized, individualized treatment plan running into a contradiction against the algorithm run by the insurer. And that's where, because the algorithm is slated in a way to be as minimalist as possible with respect to affording coverage. So that's where a lot of these problems arise. And as Virginia said, the only antidote to it is to speak up for yourself and to fight back against it.
There may not be a answer to this question, but I feel like it's where my head goes. Are there insurance companies that actually do a better job at providing services without so much pushback than other insurance companies? Like on the national scene, would you be able to rank like which insurance companies are least problematic versus which ones tend to be more problematic?
Geez, I wish we had an easy answer to that. And it sort of raises the question, right? As Laura said, when the federal government asked for these, I mean, the way you would know that, Derek, would be by looking at the comparative analyses, right? And seeing how they have evaluated themselves as a first measure of what their body of mental health coverage is. And so without those comparative analyses, right, we're sort of shooting in the dark. And we can obviously look at the paper summary of benefits for each of these plans, wherever you live and however you're insured. But answering that broader question is really exactly the kind of thing that the tool of the comparative analysis will allow us to do in a year or 5 years or 10 years, whenever we can sort of build the momentum necessary to make this a meaningful measure of enforcement.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for joining us. I know you're all the way out on the coast. We really appreciate just you guys' time. Are there any final thoughts for anybody that might be listening that you guys feel like are necessary to wrap things up?
Laura, you have any last exhortations for people?
I think that all the questions that were asked tonight just go back to the fact that we need more information, and that information lies with the insurance companies, and they're supposed to provide them through the comparative analyses that Kevin just mentioned. And as far as we know today, they haven't. And so I would just want to underline how important it is that every individual does what they can to try to prod them, to get them to be in accordance with the federal parody law as they were supposed to from 2008, but that's neither here nor there. And so I would just say that we do all have a part to play in this. And I know that everyone on this live stream has a personal stake in this. So I would just encourage you to get involved and of course, reach out to the center that Kevin and I are working if anyone has any questions, and I'm also happy to share the slides with Derek and Virginia if anybody would want them.
That'd be
Great,
wonderful.
thank you so
I love
much.
those slides. Thank you. If you are currently going through or have recently gone through an issue with your insurance company, it has denied coverage or had any adverse decision whatsoever, 4 things. Number 1, don't accept what the insurance company says. Number 2, educate yourself by going to one of those sites that I think Derek's now put in the comments.
Yeah, they're all in the comments.
Yeah. Number 3, advocate for yourself, fight back. And 4, fill out, request those comparative analysis that we've talked about. And for everybody else who's not going through a problem right now with your insurance company, there's one thing you can do. There's lots of things you can do. You can, talk to your local politicians, your national politicians, but I think this requesting these comparative analyses, we can all do it. You don't have to be, have been denied. Like Laura said, we can all do that. That's something that every single one of us watching tonight can do. Click on those links that were put in there with the center, request your comparative analysis. Let's see what these insurance companies say. And hopefully, as more and more people request these analyses, it'll be obvious if they're not responding that, there's a big problem, and maybe that'll provide some impetus to create some more enforcement tools.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Derek and Virginia.
Thank you all. Appreciate
Hey,
everybody being
yeah.
here.
Thank you guys so much for everybody that was watching and interacting just with the comments about what you were thinking. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back here 2 weeks from tonight, actually with a pre-recorded. That's the week of Thanksgiving, but it'll be a pre-recorded show that will get uploaded that night. So looking forward to seeing you guys live again the first Monday of December. So have a great week, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.